Do you want to learn how to share your insights, stories, and impact in a way that connects with the right people and brings new supporters into your world consistently and effortlessly? If that sounds like magic, don't worry, it's not. It's thought leadership. And I'm going to be talking with one of my favorite people, Tanya Bhattacharya, founder of Lumos Marketing, about the power of thought leadership as a driver of organizational growth and impact in today's episode. Tanya is a deeply knowledgeable leader in the world of personal brand messaging and has been reshaping how we, not just in the nonprofit sector, but across all sectors, understand both the why and the how of thought leadership. In our conversation, we're going to break down the essentials of effective thought leadership and map out exactly how you can leverage your passion, experience, and credibility to cultivate a vibrant community and drive real change. Welcome to the Nonprofit Mastermind podcast. I'm Richie-Babbage. I've been in the social impact game for 25 years as a social justice lawyer turned two-time nonprofit founder and leader turned growth strategist and coach for leaders around the country. I grew my nonprofit from me and an intern in a tiny closet to a high-impact 7-figure organization. And along the way, I learned so much about how to build an organization that has real impact and how to do it without burning out. In this podcast, I share the nuts and bolts of all of it so you can do that too. We dive into the mindset, strategies, and tactics of how to scale a high-impact organization and how to do it in a way that's truly sustainable. Hi, Tanya. How are you?
Hey, Brooke. I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm really good. I just want to start off by saying, and I'm sure you know this, I am such a personal and professional fan and admirer of yours. In addition to the thought leadership work, just really love how you show up and center aspects of growth that I think as a businesswoman so often get pushed to the side, setting your own pace and focusing on sustainability. So I'm really excited to be having this conversation with you today.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for saying that. That means a ton coming from you. And I mean, these pieces of business are the most important things, right?
Yeah.
They're the foundational pieces that help us grow. So thank you for saying that. I love that.
Yeah. And of course, I love having you in our mastermind, our business mastermind. For folks listening live, welcome to January 2024. You and I are actually going to see each other live in person in a week. So that's going to be really fun. I know.
Oh, I can't wait.
I'm very excited in sunny, cold New York. So that's
in the Big Apple.
Yes. The Big Apple. That's right. So before we get down to brass tacks for this masterclass, I'm really excited to talk about how effective thought leadership serves as a high leverage strategy for growing an organization in a way that's both strategic and sustainable. But I want to start off by more formally introducing you to our listeners. So I'm going to just let them know who you are and then we'll dive in. So awesome. So Tanya is the founder of Lumos Marketing, a thought leadership consultancy for social impact leaders who are ready to stand out as they stand up for their mission. She offers personal brand messaging strategy for LinkedIn, along with coaching to dismantle imposter thoughts, which I love that because you and I know that comes up a lot with the leaders that we do work with. Absolutely. She also hosts the podcast, The Campfire Circle, which for those of you listening, if you have not checked out that podcast, it's really good. It explores the idea of replacing the boardroom table as the ultimate space of leadership with a campfire circle, which is a place to share our stories, build inclusive community, and spark visionary ideas. Welcome, Tanya. I'm so excited. Let's dive in.
Oh, perfect. Let's do it. Let's jump in with both feet.
So I always like to start with the what and the why before we get to brass tacks. First, what is thought leadership? How do you define thought leadership? Because A, I think it's important to all mean the same thing. And B, it can feel really jargony to people. So what's a good working definition?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because it really can feel jargony and maybe not just jargony, but also airy-fairy or intangible or this pie in the sky idea. What is this?
That's right.
The concept is usually looped into the broad category of marketing, but I think of it instead as almost more of a way of being or a way of leading where, I would define it as a consistent practice of using our passion, our lived experience, and our credibility as fuel to build trust and community as we imagine and shape the future together for the better. So I know that was a lot of words, but essentially it's like using the gifts that we have, right? The stories we have, the expertise we have, the new ways of doing things that we've built. And sharing those widely to create change at a bigger scale. And so the opportunity is really to build an influential platform, stand out as a disruptor, as an innovator, to educate people about the cause that you've made your calling and your unique solutions. And over time, all of this turns your audience into a community that's ready to really roll up their sleeves and figure out how they identify how they fit into supporting you and just become inspired to take action.
I love that. That makes it really, really practical, which I think for a lot of people, it hasn't been. And I also like that you mentioned passion and credibility in the same definition. I think that a lot of times, particularly founders of organizations, they're mission driven. They lead from a place of passion and a deep belief in the work that they're doing. And they don't associate that with a lived credibility, right? They think credibility somehow has to come from outside recognition, some external thing.
Yep.
You
Degrees.
talk about them as actually, yeah, exactly. You talk about them as sort of fueling one another. And I love that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that piece is almost maybe more important because, I mean, think about your own life. Think about the causes that you get involved in. Think about, the fundraising events that you attend as a human being, as a, civic advocate. For me, when I see somebody passionately describing their story and how they experience the problem that they now help solve, that is what gets me excited. That's what makes me lean in.
That's right. That's what creates these rabid fans. So you talked a little bit about this, but that's the what. What's your personal why? Right? This is both vocational for you, the work that you do.
Yeah.
And I've been following you for a long time. It's avocational, right? You believe in this work. It's very meaningful to you. Why is that? Why do you think thought leadership and the way that you define it is so important?
Yeah, this is such a beautiful question. This is often something that I ask my clients. So it's really nice to have an opportunity to kind of reflect on that myself. Yeah. Right? Because, the why is so important. I feel like my why around thought leadership is really lighting up the voices of leaders who have often been historically, traditionally underestimated, right? Underrecognized, overlooked. Because the people who are closest to the work, they have the problems or they have the solutions, right? They have the unique solutions based on living it every day. Yeah. And they have so much wisdom and insight to share. And yet they aren't always the ones who are invited to the big, powerful tables where the power is, right?
Boardroom tables that you talk about. Absolutely.
Exactly. Yes. These boardroom tables, these public policy tables, these funding tables, philanthropy. That's right. Yes. They don't have an automatic invite. And so this work is an avenue to not only get those invites, but to also create our own tables and spaces of influential platforms where we get to access power brokers, decision makers, supporters, clients, volunteers, all of the different people who make up our ecosystem through our own thought leadership. We get to create our own tables or campfire circles, as I like to say.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Campfire circles. I mean, one of the things that's just really exciting to me about what you're saying in the nonprofit space, I mean, across sectors, but definitely in the nonprofit space where I work, I think that there's often a way in which people don't feel invited to the tables. But I also hear you talking about believing that you deserve to be at these tables, believing that you deserve to create your own campfire circles, and that external validation or invitation or recognition as a quote unquote thought leader, that quite frankly, for a lot of my professional life, that's what I thought it meant, right? That these invitations aren't actually the thing, right? That's not actually the full scope of powerful thought leadership and the why. That's part of what I think I hear you saying. And that's so empowering.
I love how you frame that. I mean, I think that as we do this work, even as scary as it is, even as our voice is shaking, even if we're like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I'm about to hit post on this thing on LinkedIn. This is so uncomfortable. As we get 1% more uncomfortable with these actions, we get stronger in our own leadership. We start to realize, this does really, not even realize because we know that it matters, but we really embody our values of like how we're showing showing up, everything starts to match. Our values, our actions, the ways we show up in the world. So yeah,
synergy.
Totally.
Absolutely.
Synergy.
So beginning to notch down a bit, what do you see as the relationship between effective thought leadership, the way you're describing it, and sustainable organizational growth? I have always thought about and talked about thought leadership as a strategy, a high leverage, meaning high return on investment strategy for expanding an organization's network, attracting the right people into its ecosystem. Does this resonate with you? What do you think is that relationship between growth and the effort it takes to do thought leadership?
Yeah. Fabulous, fabulous question. I love how you said attracting people to its ecosystem. Like I love those words. And so maybe I can answer this question a little bit by rooting it into my own story of being an executive director of a relatively, learning how to build a big voice for a small shop.
Yes, I would love that. And I know a lot of this grew out of that experience for you. Yeah.
Oh, all of it, all of it. And that's why lived experience is so important, because we learn how to do a thing and then we realize, I can help other people do this.
I can help other people. Absolutely. That's right. And I know that's been true for both you and I. And I think a lot of women of color, that's been their experience. So absolutely. Walk us through it.
Okay, sure. So, I mentioned I worked for a smaller shop. We were scrappy. We didn't have a PR firm, right? We didn't have we didn't have
a marketing team.
Definitely not. Yeah, definitely not. You're looking at the marketing team, and the ED and the fundraiser kind of thing,
Yeah, absolutely. If you're like, I'll share this with my communications manager, and then you turn the corner and it's me. It's just,
you just put on a different hat.
That's right. Exactly.
Oh man. Oh, yes.
The days. Yeah.
The days. Yes. So, I knew we had to grow a bigger voice, and we didn't have a lot of, we didn't have an ads budget, for example, to do that. And so what I did instead was, I really challenged myself to tell one interesting story per week on LinkedIn, because what we lacked in time and kind of at the time lacked in strategy, like we were abundant in stories. There were just stories happening all around me all the time. Really interesting, fabulous, beautiful stories that I knew that if they just got out into the world, we would be able to really scale our reach and our influence. And they weren't being shared with our, I guess you would say, second degree connections, people who are outside of our immediate sphere.
That's right.
And so I started sharing them on LinkedIn. And after about a quarter of doing this consistently, so about 90 days, what I noticed is, like you said, we started attracting people into our ecosystem, right? We started getting a sustainable stream of inbound opportunities and conversations.
Wow. Yeah.
So instead of me having to go out and knock on doors and send out pitches and, ask for introductions all the time. I mean, I still had to do that because that's just part of the work, but we started getting more inbound opportunities. And what those looked like is reporters. Like, for example, we got an opportunity to have our therapy dog. I worked for a residential addiction treatment program for women.
I was going to say, wait a minute, back up.
So we had a therapy dog on our campus, Lola. And so we talked about that on our LinkedIn, and we got an inquiry from American Kennel Club wanting to talk about Lola in their big magazine, local corporate folks, like CSR folks and CEOs of local companies started hearing about our fundraiser and seeing their peers were sponsoring. And we're like, oh, should I come to this? Should I support this? Tell me more about your event. Local nonprofit leaders, HR representatives, just local healthcare professionals started learning more about our actual specialty healthcare, or, we were an addiction treatment program and started, creating referral networks into our org. So there were many different avenues that people could plug into.
Yeah.
But they started learning about how they could do that at scale. And the longer I did that, or the longer we did that, the not only just the more deeper it became, but the more exponential it came, because it created sort of a flywheel effect. Because as we connected with more people and shared more stories, just more and more and more and more people got exposed to it because of the sort of mycelial-like network of LinkedIn, the network piece of it.
So you talk about sharing stories, and I want to dig a little deeper there in two ways. First, I love the emphasis on stories because I think a lot of the organizations that I work with think for some reason they need like more than stories, right? They need facts. They need data. And so I think part of what I hear you saying is you just started with the story, the things that were happening, right, in your space naturally.
Yes.
I love that.
Absolutely. And part of what that was for me is I worked for a very stigmatized cause, especially at the time. I started, doing this 15 years ago, and this is perinatal addiction treatment. This is pregnant women struggling with addiction. And so the tide has turned significantly since then. But 15 years ago, just the things that I would hear there was a lot of education needing to happen. Yeah. And stigma reduction needing to happen. And I recently learned, I went to the mental health marketing conference and spoke there, but I recently learned that storytelling is the only evidence-based approach to breaking down stigma. Because you can't argue with someone's lived experience.
You can't. And you start to see a shared humanity when you hear stories. That's why they're so powerful. Absolutely. 100%.
It's all about that shared humanity in those moments of connection. And really facts sometimes land as, you used the word jargon earlier. They land as statistics. To hear something like, 40,000 people struggle with substance use disorder. It's kind of like we can't do anything. It goes totally over our head. But to hear the story of one person or one family member, or how I as a leader relate to this cause, or how I as a leader reflect on what's happening, like those are the things that really land.
Absolutely. And I think another really powerful thing about story, and I'm glad that you highlighted that you were in a space where I always talk about how a lot of organizations are trying to raise money or build support for things that are not like saving baby seals, right? Like if everybody wants to save a baby seal, like the closer you are to a baby seal nonprofit, like you put up a picture of a baby seal and people send you money, right? And Sarah McLaughlin and you're in. And so the farther away you get from that, the tougher it can be. And I know a lot of folks talk about and think about fundraising in that context. Part of what, as we think about thought leadership as this high leverage strategy, what those stories do is they elevate and illuminate shared humanity, but they also allow your people, the people for whom your vision of impact really resonates, people that have an affinity, they allow themselves to recognize that affinity, to say, oh, wait, these are stories that resonate with me. These must be my people. Right. And so that I think is something that a lot of organizations struggle to do, is like find their people in the like haystack of potential people. Absolutely.
Yes. And this calls them in. It's like a clarion call. Yes. It's just like brings them in like a magnet. It's like, it feels very magical. It feels very like serendipitous when it happens. You're like, oh, where did all these people come from?
There's a method to the madness. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
So my question about that is, what kind of stories, right? So if I am a leader who's like, I have stories I want to share. Am I doing a case study? Am I doing a testimonial? Am I putting up a video? How good at storytelling do I need to be for this strategy to be effective? Because I will say I am a lawyer by trade.
Yeah.
Storytelling was not my thing. I was really good with facts. And when you started talking to me about stories, my brain would short circuit and I would be like, I can put up a picture and be like, this is Joe, but I never wanted to do that. So for anyone whose brain is short circuiting, how can they think about what it means to post a story, for example?
Yeah. Well, I think just like with everything else, we all get better with practice, always, And so some of the things that I think about is like, it can be very hard for nonprofit leaders to talk about ourselves. Very, very hard.
Yes.
And so maybe start with lifting up your community, because that's something that we do really well. I think that's something we do very naturally. So maybe one idea for a story is like, lift up your board members, like lift up your fundraising committee, lift up your event committee. Like if you just had an event, lift up your neighbors. Like you have little pockets of people who do incredible work for you at your organization. And so let their contributions be heard. Share a story about how they got involved, what that was like for them, and lift them up. And part of the power of doing that on a platform like LinkedIn is as you tag them, like their connections begin to see this work as well. And you get to scale your impact in a really deep way.
Yeah.
Another idea I have, and when I was an active fundraiser, I was trained with this model called Benavon. It's a great model. It's a really, really great model. I really enjoyed it. And so one of the things that they teach is kind of almost like a storytelling technique where you share a myth that exists about your work, a fact, because there comes that fact. If you're really comfortable with fact, you get to tell that fact. And then you launch into a story that showcases that fact in action, right? A story that showcases. So you share the fact, but then you actually share a human experience behind it. And then you end with a need. You almost end with like a call to action. Like if we could get, X amount of money, if we could get a connection to this organization, if we could get whatever,
brilliant.
we could fulfill this need, right? We could fulfill this need.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Okay. So when should all of this start, right? When in an organization's development should a leader begin thinking about thought leadership? I work with organizations that are under 2 million, and a lot of the conversations I have with them are that it doesn't feel as rubber on the road. And I think you've addressed some of this with how practical and tactical, or concrete, I should say, your definition is and what you mean by it. But some of the, not even pushback, but conversations that I have with leaders are, when we're bigger, we'll invest in thought leadership, right? When we've really nailed these other things that are associated with being an $800,000 organization, then we'll have the luxury of thinking about thought leadership. But I suspect that is not what you would recommend or how you think about it. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Thank you for positioning this question. This is a really, really good thought. So what I would say to that is, who better to invest in their thought leadership than a smaller, maybe more grassroots, maybe just like a, $2 million or so, a smaller organization, right? And I say that for a couple of reasons. So sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes when I talk to EDs of $100 million organizations plus, they are farther removed from the direct service work. There's just more space in between, right? They're not in the trenches as much. They're traveling the world and speaking at conferences.
That's right.
For an example. And that's important too, right? But for our smaller shop EDs who are wearing all those hats, like we talked about earlier, I'm thinking back to my days, like literally from getting roped into driving patients around in the van when a frontline.
Absolutely.
Yes, to buy Post-its. Absolutely. Yeah. Who better to share your stories from inside the trenches, right? And I would also say, secondly, it's a very genuine and natural way to grow without having to invest a lot of money. Like I know that was my experience. We didn't have a big budget. We didn't have an ads budget. We couldn't put on a big fancy in-person local regional conference and invite people, but we could share our stories. And the only resource that took was time. But you know what? Our thought leadership content operated and worked for us like a 24/7 marketing team, even though we didn't have one, right? Of people. And it just continued rippling out throughout LinkedIn to connect us with new friends. And I'd also say to this too, it doesn't just have to be all on you as the ED. If you invest in your team's thought leadership skills and muscles, like you are reaching out into the community.
Sharing. Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. And maybe you don't have a team, but maybe you have a board. Maybe you have alumni. Like there are people that are willing to fly the flag for you and reach out with multiple hands into your world and bring in, volunteers and advocates in. Actually, and one more final thing I'll say to your specific point around, once we get to this level, we'll start sharing. There's nothing more powerful than building in public. I know sometimes it feels like you have to have everything figured out.
It feels so scary. Yeah.
I know it can feel so scary, but that's what builds trust because you're showing up as in an authentic experience and people see that. And then they also start to see the need. If you show up as a perfect organization, what's the need? How can people plug in and help?
Agreed. Agreed. I think one of the toughest mindset gremlins for the organizations that I work with to just slay is this idea that they have to show up as buttoned up and perfect and have everything figured out. I mean, it shows up in conversations with funders and donors. And the number of times I've had to say, that is not the expectation. They want to be a partner, right? You are on a journey with your supporters. And if you're so far ahead of the journey, you're like, look at what we've done and it's all done. There's no role for them. And this thought leadership, another benefit of it is bringing people into a journey with you, along a journey with you.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's exactly it. That's exactly, a lot of people think they have to show up as an expert, as an authority. Like you'll see those words when you look up, when you like read about thought leadership, you'll see those words a lot. And I think it can dissuade people. I don't think you have to show up as the one and only like guru. Like instead, you just show up as a go-to voice, a practice guide, somebody who's in and around this work all the time, but we don't have to have all the answers. So I love how you, absolutely.
So you talked a little bit about your role as the leader of the organization and sort of expanding your thought leadership footprint. I had a great conversation really recently with a good friend of mine who's just a really wonderful leader of a social justice legal organization here in New York City. And he was really grappling with how to engage in effective thought leadership without feeling like he was sucking up the spotlight for himself. And that was both just beautiful to me, that he was really grappling with that, right? Not wanting to be soak up all the sunlight, but as a result, perhaps not engaging in as much of the thought leadership that as the leader of the organization, he was uniquely positioned to do. And so I'd love your take on that, right? How can leaders, particularly ones who are interested in leading from within a community or leading alongside a community, understand the relationship between themselves as individuals and stewards of the organization in this context of thought leadership?
This is the thing that I live in. Like, this is like a warm blanket in terms of, this is something
I'm watching your face. You're just like leaning in. You're like, yes.
Like, I just want to talk about this the whole rest of the time. Not really, but this is like my thing. I love this question so much. So what I would say to that is, yes, you are getting, I'm not going to lie, you are getting into the spotlight a little bit, but then that reflects light back onto your mission, right? You're not getting into the limelight or the spotlight or in the sunshine to be self-promotional or like grandstanding. That's not what it's about. I think we see a lot of models of this, unfortunately, that go the wrong way. And we think, we never want to show up like that person. But all of the nonprofit leaders that I know are humble, tender-hearted, so caring to a fault that we could never almost show up like this if we tried. It always becomes about the organization. And so what I would say to this is, when I think about companies like Apple and Nike and American Express, they spend bazillions of dollars on their branding. They hire spokespeople. They hire big consulting firms to painstakingly create brand personalities, right? Yeah. And they do all of that because they're trying to humanize their company. They're trying to show up with a personality. They're trying to show up relatable. They're trying to show up like a human because they know that will help them make more money. That will attract more customers, more ambassadors. But as a nonprofit leader, you have a huge advantage over these mega corporations, which is that you already are a human.
You're a human. Yeah.
Yes, you are. And you have a perspective. You have a personality. You have an opinion. You have a lived experience. And so that are the things, like, you have insights on the things that are happening in your world every day. And you have a fresh take that the people who want to know more will connect with. Right. Yeah. And I very intimately know, because I faced this myself, especially as a woman of color, as someone who's barely 30 when I took on the ED role. There were I just did not look like a lot of the other people that I saw around me. Right?
Oh, yeah.
Especially living here where I live in Orange County, California. But, and so I knew it felt very weird and felt very braggy, very ego driven to start in the beginning of starting to just like share what I thought. And, we have been conditioned to feel that way, to be humble and to a fault, to be seen and not heard, and maybe sometimes not even seen in the first place. But what I will leave you with, and what I want your friend to hear, and all the many, many people who feel this way, is that your nonprofit's work, as amazing as it is, does not speak up for itself, right? It does not speak for itself. You have to speak up for your work. And it's a disservice to your work if you're not showing up and sharing about it on platforms with people and decision makers who can help you make your mission a reality. And those missions and those visions, they just can't happen by ourselves. They all require community. And so it's sharing our personal who we are, sharing who we are, that builds a bridge for people to get involved in the missions that we care about.
Oh, that is perfect advice. Oh, yes. I'm literally going to send this episode to him and be like, Tanya just did a little coaching for you.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. Okay. So brass tacks. We're going to notch down even further. I'm the leader of a $800,000 organization and I'm sold. I'm listening. I'm like, I'm in. Thought leadership, absolutely part of our growth strategy. How do I get started? What do I do next?
Yeah. I think you have to start with why. Simon Sinek says that. We all know that, but it can't be overstated. I think you have to start with your vision for the world that you are trying to make possible through your work. And maybe it's slightly different from your organization's vision. Like maybe it's not
interesting. Say more about that.
Yes. Okay. So we're showing up as people, as multifaceted human beings. And so of course we have a deep, deep passion for the work that we do at our nonprofit. And we also do many other things. Maybe we're involved in other causes. Maybe we run a social justice legal organization, but we also foster dogs, and we also consult as a XYZ. Like we contain multitudes. And so it's kind of like, what is our vision? Because we don't just have to share about our organization. We don't just have to share about our work.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that. That's a really important point. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes people think like they're doing it wrong, or they're like, how much can I talk about other things? It's like as much as you want, like as long as it ties back to kind of the silver thread and the vision that you have for the life that you are living. Like, yes, what is your vision as a person, as a leader? 100%. I would start there. And then I would start to think about who are the kinds of people that need to hear more about your vision and be inspired by your vision in order to come alongside you and help make that vision a reality, right? Are they a certain type of profession? Do they have a certain title? Like, do they live in a certain geographic area? And then I'd start to think more about their behaviors in terms of like, where do they show up? Are they on LinkedIn? No. Do they read, Nonprofit Quarterly? Do they listen to podcasts? Do they show up to in-person conferences? And if so, what are they? Like, I would dig deep and do some research into where do these people consume information? Where do they show up? Where do they go for what do they trust? Who do they trust? Right.
I call those watering holes.
Yes.
Like natural metaphorical watering holes that people will naturally gravitate towards to get a thing that they need, community, information, etc. Yep.
Yeah,
find those
exactly.
holes.
Those watering holes. That's perfect. And so that gives you the watering holes. But then in addition to that, I'd also think about like your interrelationship with that vision in terms of like, what is your take on it? What is your perspective? What's the root cause of this thing that you're so passionate about? Like, what are the trends that are coming up in this space? So this is a little bit of just like thoughtful reflection. And you can take as much time in this space as you want. Like, I think this is slow work intentionally. This is intentional work. And then you start to put it together, how can you get in front of those watering holes? And how can you do it in a way that's kind of unique and different? And for me, like I found that my watering hole is very much LinkedIn. It was kind of like a one-stop shop in terms of being able to publish my thoughts and also at the same time get discovered in front of these decision makers. Right. And over time, like just know that this is slower work. This is a long-term strategy. Like you're not going to put up one post and things are going to change overnight, right?
You start getting this inbound flood of like, we want to send you $1 million. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's a really great. So I'm just going to reflect back what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Start with your why, identify your people,
right?
Find out or do some research and figure out where they gather, where they congregate, what their watering holes are.
Yeah.
Figure out how to get into those watering holes, in front of those watering holes.
Yeah.
And then what are you going to say? What's your perspective? And I loved that you said thoughtful reflection on your mission, on your why, on your point of view. I think we talked about lived experience and personal stories and the stories of the people that we serve and the communities that we serve. One just really rich source of information for thought leadership that I often suggest people look to. If you are running programs, if you are doing work, things are happening, right? Even if you don't have this really sophisticated evaluation plan and, you have both stories and insights into the problem that you're trying to solve. What is working to solve the problem? What isn't working to solve the problem? You have such a unique insight into that because you are on the ground doing that work, or someone on your team is on the ground doing that work. And we can forget as people that what we know is not known by all, right? It's so obvious to us that if you run an after school program, and, I'm going to use this as an example because it came up when I was in law school. Like, if you want people to come to a meeting, serve pizza, right? And so if you are like running these meetings and nobody's coming, that was really obvious to me. Like, you have to have food. And then I would go, so the first organization that I started was in law school, and I would go with my co-founder to meetings, community city council meetings in Boston, and they wouldn't have any food and nobody would come to the meetings. And they're like, what's happening? Nobody cares about this issue. And I was like, wait, you didn't know that you have to have food if at a 5:30 p.m. meeting? And so that is not exactly thought leadership, but this realization that what you're seeing in your work is a great source of insight that not everybody has.
Yes. Oh, the curse of knowledge is so real. It is so real. I had that thought even a couple times during this conversation. It's like you and I are having a lovely conversation. And I'm kind of thinking in the back of my head, but doesn't everybody know this? And then I have to remind myself, no, like I talk about this all day long, every single day.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly. And you brought up a good point with the pizza thing about the pizza and the food in the meeting. Like, that seems kind of random, but I think start somewhere and become known, like go all in on that one small, like,
I love that. Yeah.
Belief and perspective and keep talking about it, become known as that person who talks about that. Cause like, it's much easier to become known for one very specific idea. And then grow from there and start sharing your many perspectives. I think sometimes when you start by sharing your whole multifaceted life, it can be difficult, but like start with that one thought that you are just like gonna really, really fly the flag around.
That's right. And I don't think people have to be afraid. And this is also a conversation I had with a woman that I work with as a coach. Her concern, she's just this beautiful, multifaceted theory of change. And when she communicates about it, wants to communicate the entire thing, all of the multifaceted pieces and how they all relate. And if she isn't talking to academics, it often doesn't land. Not because it's not great work, but because it's very complex.
Yeah.
And, again, going back to my days when I first started my organization, what I shared with her was one of the first things I learned about picking one thing as a way in was, as a lawyer, I saw connections that felt very important to me.
Yes.
And so if I communicated just one piece of a story or one piece of impact, I felt like, but wait a minute, there are 8 other pieces that you have to understand if you're really going to understand, and people's eyes would glaze over. And so I just want to lift up this piece of what you're saying. Start somewhere, not just because it's easier for you to do that as a person, but actually it's a better bridge. One issue, one point of view, one story. People can locate themselves there. And then once they're in your world, you can start bringing in the multi-layers and the multifaceted impact and all of the other things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. And you leave them wanting more when you just share that like one little piece.
That's right.
Open
the loop. Okay. Yeah. So you talked about LinkedIn and thought leadership on LinkedIn. That is also my watering hole. That's, I think, for a lot of nonprofit folks, there's just a wonderful diversity of people there, and it is designed algorithmically to grow. Why you've identified LinkedIn? And do you think that the principles that you're talking about here would work on other platforms if an organization says, but actually Instagram is my platform?
Yes, 100%. I think the principles that we've talked about so far definitely would work on other platforms. You do want to be where your people are. And I just found as a, healthcare organization that works with a lot of other professionals and funders and, like corporate, CSR people, LinkedIn was definitely my space. And
that's where they're there.
And there's a couple of reasons why I think LinkedIn, even if, you think Instagram is really your place, I think there's I think there's a argument to be made for LinkedIn. And so there's a couple reasons why I'm LinkedIn monogamous, right? And just like really, really encourage people to be there. Well, let me start here. A lot of people say, I don't think LinkedIn's my place because I don't think my people really use LinkedIn. It might appear that way, but we've got a lot of LinkedIn lurkers.
Oh,
yes, they are lurking. One of our past mutual coaches, Mariah Cause, calls it lurking in luxury. They're lurking in luxury because only 3% of active LinkedIn users post their own content. And that blew me away. 3%. So 97% of LinkedIn users don't post content, but they log on, they scroll, they watch, they see what's going on in their network. They see what's happening. And so even if you think your people aren't on there, they're logging on. And you start to know this, like the way that you know this is working is when you show up to an in-person gathering and people start to come up to you and say, they recognize you. They know who you are. They've seen your thought leadership on LinkedIn. Sometimes they come up to you and have a conversation about, something that you've shared. The other piece that's so great about LinkedIn is that, in our field of social impact, people move around a lot. They switch jobs. They do. Yes. They just do. And LinkedIn is a flexible Rolodex. Even as people move around in their jobs, you still have a line of connection to them and you're able to send messages and they're able to stay in touch with what you're doing just by nature of being connected, right? And so your CRM can't do that. Your nonprofit CRM just can't do that.
I love that.
And the last thing that I'll say, I could just keep going and going and going, but I think the last thing that I'll say, even if you don't want to be like an active user on LinkedIn in terms of sharing content, LinkedIn is a very trusted site in the eyes of Google. And so when people Google you as a leader, as a person, maybe it's because they're considering having you on their board. Maybe they're considering, whatever. Your LinkedIn profile is going to be one of the top things to come up.
Yeah.
So
that's right.
Yeah. So at least build out your profile.
I love that.
Yeah.
So what's the goal? Let's stick with LinkedIn because I'm old. And I think it's a really good place as we talk about leadership as a leverage lever, right? As a way to bring people into your watering holes and into your ecosystem. Is my goal likes? Is it comments? Is it follows? Is it impressions? How, if I buy into the strategy and start to build it out over the long term, how do I know it's working?
Yeah, the great question. I would say the goal is not so much likes and, I would say the goal is conversations. I think the goal is conversations. And then the secondary goal then becomes stronger relationships, right? Because that's a direct function of conversations. People say content is king, right? We've all heard that. But I say engagement is queen, it's just as important. And so the real goal, if we cut through all the vanity metrics and some of the BS and stuff.
That's right.
The real goal is our ability to take a relationship on LinkedIn offline and nurture them into whoever they're meant to be in our world.
Hoping you would absolutely.
Yeah. Yes. And it can be inbound, meaning they're finding us organically through our content or through shared relationships. Maybe, as a nonprofit leader, we're tagged at our local OC Community Foundation, our local community foundation's list of great leaders to watch, and people find us that way and they get, whatever. Or we can also go outbound with our strategy and start to reach out proactively and search for the people that we want more of in our nonprofit's ecosystem and begin to connect with them.
Connect with them, DM, absolutely.
DM, yes. Invite them into a tour, invite them into a relationship. And don't be afraid to do that because, if you are showing up and sharing your thought leadership, people want to get further involved. So don't be afraid to reach out. And the thing is, I know we're busy. And somebody might be listening to this and being like, that's so funny that you'd think I have the time to do this. If you can connect with 3 new people per week, that's 150 people in a year.
Whoa.
Right?
Yes.
It's I'm a big fan of Atomic Habits. These little tiny things create huge impact over time. And the thing is, if you're searching for, let's say I just, spent some time with a nonprofit founder who has an organization that mentors young lawyers of color, lawyers when they're in law school to nurture them. And so if she just searched for attorneys in our geographic area and, filtered it down by different things, she could over a year, she would have 150 new potential mentors and donors in her ecosystem. Right. That's huge.
That's right. And we talk a lot with folks about things like people to be on their board, people to be advisors. LinkedIn is really powerful for that. And as you build your thought leadership and presence, when you start reaching out to people to explore a board relationship or an advisory relationship, some kind of partnership, they have a landing place. They can see your posts. They can see your point of view. They can see if there's an affinity for the work that your organization does. They can see your profile. So there's a really nice sort of feedback loop in that way.
It is. Well, and I just want to say one thing in terms of board, finding, people to be on your board on LinkedIn. When you do a search on LinkedIn, there's all kinds of filters, and there's actually a checkbox where you can check, if only show me people who have actually opted in to saying, I want to serve on a nonprofit board, or I want to provide pro bono services. So that's a really, really powerful tool to have.
Yeah. LinkedIn is really great for all of it.
Yes.
Okay. So to wrap us up, I want to almost zoom back out for a moment.
Yeah.
And ask you are my go-to resident expert on thought leadership and thought leadership in a practical, high leverage way on LinkedIn. If you can leave our listeners with one piece of advice, just one thing that you're like, in all of the years that I've been doing this, and all of the coaching that I've done, you work across sector, people pay a lot of money to work with you. What's one piece of insight that you will give us here for people to take away if they remember nothing else?
You know what I want to say to this is I have a saying, I think that we can all be lazy on LinkedIn.
Yes.
Like, be lazy on LinkedIn. And I'm trying to reclaim the word lazy. Lazy has a bad connotation. I think it's like being life first. I think it's like just about doing the things that are actually important and intentional, and then leaving plenty of time to just like have a good life.
Absolutely.
Spacious. Yes. Restful. All of those things. So I have a strong point of view on this because I know way too many people who listen to the advice that's very much rooted in hustle culture, like post every day, blah, blah, blah. And then they think if they can't do that, they might as well just not show up at all. They're failing. Right. Yeah. So why even do it? And so you can be lazy on LinkedIn. You can post, once per week. You can come up with one story per week. There's stories happening all around you all the time. So, just show up once per week. Share a story, engage with some people, leave a couple comments, like make it easeful, make it fit into your day and your week, because that is what will create that like ability to do this over the long haul. And it's that consistency, not necessarily like the constant cadence, but the consistency for what feels right for you that will create this ripple effect.
That is wonderful. So if people want to work with you, how can they learn more about you, find you? Where should we send people to connect with you?
Yes. I mean, the best place would probably honestly be my LinkedIn. And so you can just search for my name, Tanya Bhattacharya. I also have a podcast, like you mentioned earlier, the Campfire Circle. So I share a lot of free resources about LinkedIn and thought leadership on there. And then the last place would just be my website, lumosmarketing.co.
Where there are also really great resources there.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Tanya, thank you so much. This has been exactly the kind of masterclass that I envisioned, and it is always just wonderful talking with you. Thanks so much for being here.
You're so welcome. Thank you for being so gracious and generous with this space. I love chatting with you, and this was such a fun convo. Thank you.
Have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much for joining me this week. If you enjoy this podcast, I would love for you to leave a rating and a review. I read every single one, and they really do matter. I also share extra tidbits and resources building on what we talk about here in my newsletter, Leadership Forward 321. You can sign up by texting the word impact to 66866. And finally, definitely check out the links and resources that I mentioned in this episode at brookericchiebabbage.com/podcast. See you next week.